Already, I have 12 o'clock, so let's get started. Hello and welcome to the webinar on prioritizing your home hardening approach. My name is Carrie Berger, and I am your host and the manager of Oregon State University's Extension Fire Program. This webinar is part of a series of webinars on FireWare, Fire Prepared, meant to help prepare us for wildfire season. More specifically, this series aims to address preparedness at 3 levels: the individual, community, and the landscape. Today, we will look at the specific home hardening recommendations from experts that will help to enhance the survivability of your home in case of an approaching wildfire. So it's our intention to provide broad level information in these webinars and then provide local online meetings that will dial this information in for your specific area or county. And because you signed up for this webinar, you will receive information for those areas specific meetings. So stay tuned and feel free to visit the online webinar guide for updates. I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat in just a minute here, so just hang tight. Before we begin the presentation, I have some webinar logistics that I'd like to quickly cover. This session is being recorded, and all webinar recordings can be found on our Forestry and Natural Resource Extension YouTube channel. Again, I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat here in just a minute, so hang tight. We're also streaming live on the Extension's Facebook page. I'm using the closed captioning feature, and so hopefully you all are seeing that at the bottom of your screens. If you do not want to see the captioning, simply go to the live transcripts at the bottom of your screen and go ahead and select hide subtitles. For the people tuning into the webinar on Zoom, your audio has been muted. If you are having audio troubles and are connected to your computer's audio, I suggest hanging up and dialing in with your phone. You can always post a question in the chat window if you are having technical difficulties. But if you have a question on the information that is being presented, please type your question into the Q&A window. We have limited time, but we'll do our best to answer your questions live. And I know John will take some time to answer questions throughout his presentation. If you don't catch all the information presented, please don't worry. I'll provide all the resources and links mentioned during the webinar on both our fire program website, and I'll even follow up with an email just to be sure you get that information. So don't be busy writing down all the links or trying to copy the links. I'll go ahead and send that out in an email for you. So just totally focus in today. Okay, so let's get this webinar started. I want to introduce our moderator, Erin Groth. Erin is the fire program's coastal fire specialist, and Erin will be helping to corral all your questions and get those answered throughout and at the end of the speaker's presentation. And then John Rizza, he is the fire program's Northeast fire specialist, and he will be our presenter today. I know John has a lot to say, so I'm just going to turn it right over to him now. Thank you, John, whenever you're ready.
Awesome, Carrie. Thanks for all that. Yeah, so I'm going to present on some very specific recommendations and suggestions from the experts, from the research that's been coming out related to home hardening. And I want to provide an opportunity in the Q&A for y'all to ask questions, and I'll kind of stop along the way as I go while we're talking about specific subject areas. And then we'll follow up at the very end with some more time for some more general questions. So we'll kind of do it that way. A little bit different approach here today, but I think that we'll have a bunch of questions and I want to be sure to ask those. So if you see me talking about, let's say, siding, and you have a specific siding question, go ahead and type it in the Q&A and we'll try and stop and see if we can get some of those in. If we miss your question on the first round here through, we can follow up at the end there. So, and of course, we're always happy to help later. So let's get going right away. We got a lot of cover here today, and I'm excited to talk about these different opportunities with you. So what is home hardening and why are we talking about it? And we're really looking at trying to share some of the suggested best practices that are going to help you improve your chances to withstand a wildfire in your neighborhood. So you can see in this photo here, this is up from Wallowa County, kind of up where I'm at in the Northeast area. And this is a home these folks have really gone pretty far to do a lot of work. Now they're not done and they're still doing work, but there's a lot of really good stuff here. So you might see this home, and again, in the picture, moving forward, I want to thank the landowner here for helping us with supplying these. We had a whole day in the field with these folks in this community and saw some good stuff and saw some not so great stuff and had really good conversations. So you'll see more of this as we continue to move through. So why does being home hardened matter, and what is it? Well, basically, let's first talk about why we want to be there. So we need to be Ember prepared for the situation, because the research is suggesting, and we're finding, that the primary culprit in structure ignitions is directly related to firebrands. Now, there's some research coming from different projects and different places talking anywhere from maybe 60, 65%, all the way up to 90% of home ignitions caused by embers. Now, the number's not all that important, but what is important is that a significant proportion of homes are ignited by embers. And so that's something that kind of puts a little, question asterisk on that point, is that we need to consider what that looks like. And so there is a lot of research being done from a whole host of different organizations and nonprofits and businesses. And this particular example here, you see, this is part of this big research project done by IBHS. They have this really neat, what they call Ember generator. And so they're intentionally building structures inside a mainly fire resistant, fireproof type structure, and they shower these homes with embers to do research. And so we'll talk a lot about the findings they have, and you can see in that photo, it definitely can be a not so awesome deal when your home is being showered. And so we know a lot of these wildfires occur in times of high winds, and so those winds transport those embers and they land far away. And the quantity of these embers landing in a given location is what really starts to cause problems. So there was a research project done here at OSU actually recently, more related to, not specifically on structures, but wildfires in general. And they did this really cool study related to identifying char marks and what char marks look like and what ones are going to cause, the firebrands that ignite something down the road or upwind or downwind or wherever they're going. And it was a really cool deal. And so they used this special fabric that had a fire resistant coating on it, but was able to really pick up those embers. So even the tiniest of embers can leave a mark, and they can help quantify that and understand how things are going to ignite and how far away and what the wind does and what products we can use. So really cool tools that they're using to help us study this. And then they do some, data processing to give some outcomes and hopefully help us build some good recommendations. So what I wanted to really emphasize here is that home hardening is a key strategy to be more ember prepared. And what does actually home hardening mean? Well, it means that we're doing something to not allow an ember to get up in a place where it might ignite our home or our structure. So we're really trying to harden that home. We're providing a defense system from the outside, if that's pretty clear there, it should be. And we're going to talk a lot about some of the different components. I'll highlight a few. What we see in the picture on the left here, this is from an Ember Aware poster that a whole host of extension organizations collaborated on. I actually had to cut a few out, but there are 22 different points of ignitions that were identified as something that we should be looking at and addressing. That is a lot of things to look at. And so today we're going to talk about how do we prioritize some of those and kind of take some of that low-hanging fruit and look at some of those things that might be a big benefit to what we're trying to do, which, we're talking about hardening our homes against wildfire that might be advancing. On the right-hand side, this is a demonstration again from IBHS. They built a standard construction home versus a hardened home. And so the standard is on the left and the hardened is on the right. And you can see those embers coming in from that Ember generator that they created. And in this picture was taken at about 8 minutes into this demonstration, somewhere in that range, maybe 10 minutes. And we've got significant fire, getting up against that home. And so for me, if I'm going to build my house, I'm looking at what's on the right-hand side here that can help me withstand that same exact amount of ember is hitting both sides of that structure. And I want my chances on that one that's on the right side there. And we're going to talk about that today. So how do we get started? Well, the very first thing we want to do is conduct an assessment. If you haven't ever done one, start really simple. Let's just do a quick checklist. And there are resources all over. And in our webpage, we have a lot of links that will be provided to you, as well as the recording. So you can check those out and click on those. But Firewise has a very simple checklist, talks about, there's about 8 things on the list. Now, I found a really cool one at an Oakland community that they put together a little more in depth. It's great. It says, are we good, or do we need to look at this? And can we go through and do an assessment and then come back and sit down at the dinner table and have a discussion about what things might work better, or where we need to maybe focus our efforts in the upcoming season or years ahead. On the far right-hand side is a really in-depth structural assessment that also covers defensible space. So further out from the home, as we've talked about in some of our previous webinars, really detailed. And this is offered by, in this particular community, they were able to find some funding to get a group together that's helping assess these properties for homeowners who are requesting that. It's not something we're sharing out so everybody knows that you're a bad neighbor or a good neighbor. That's not the objective here, but what we're really trying to do, take an assessment, find that stuff that we think we can address quickly, and look at some of those longer term pieces so that we can actually start making a difference on hardening our home and our overall ignition zone to this vulnerable wildfire risk that we have here. So how do we prioritize all those 22 different points of ignition that are something we should be keeping an eye on? And so I found this really great diagram. I thought it was nice. It's not a per dollar per thing, but it's a relative assessment of the priority of something versus the cost of that. And so I want to highlight a few things today that we think are relatively important. And this is not saying that these are the only things you should focus on. I just wanted to give some really in-depth examples of some things that really can make a huge difference for you on the ground. And so maintenance is the highest priority and pretty much one of the lowest. It is the lowest cost on this given chart. That again, it's a relative rating here, but maintenance is easy, something we can do every year, where we can hire someone to help us with not too much of an expense, and then we can get this going and help us be in a better place. And so the IBHS who is doing all those diagrams or the research I showed earlier, and those diagrams and pictures, really recommends the president and CEOs in an interview. And he said, the big takeaway is maintenance and materials matter. And so today we're going to talk about maintenance and some of the materials and how the techniques to utilize those materials in your structure. We're going to talk a little bit about retrofitting and new construction. I'll kind of do both of those so you can kind of see what it looks like. The roof, very expensive, much more expensive, and still a significantly high priority. And so we're going to talk about that in depth today and what that looks like, both the roof system and what's around that specific roof item that you have. Decks are another more costly. Almost everyone, not everyone, but many homes have decks or patios. And so it's really important that we address that, because it's a very vulnerable spot to be affected by embers. Fences are another one. Can be a little bit less costly, but we can do little things to provide a big benefit to those fences, whether they're, livestock fences or, privacy fences, etc. So I think that's something I want to touch on a little bit pretty quickly here. But we're never going to be able to provide a fireproof home. This is an example from a company who's doing these house wrap things. I mean, they're putting this basically Mylar type wrap with a chicken wire on top of that and saying, okay, your home's good and protected. Well, this isn't realistic for most of us. Maybe on a super high value deal, or we have some time and it's a really high structure, but I've actually never seen this done. I know they did some things this year in California and NorCal there to protect trees, and some, in the past have protected some historic structures. But this is a very intensive deal, and not all of us are going to be able to just run around and wrap our homes. We got to work on, getting a ready, set, go situation and getting that away if we need to, and packing up our livestock and animals, children, etc. So This is a pretty extreme case. I just wanted to show you this isn't all that realistic, but there are some examples of these things. And so what we instead think is a better way is let's be a little more passive in the work we're doing and set ourselves up for success. And we can focus on, evacuating or getting our animals and ourselves out of the situation. Okay, so let's talk about maintenance. I had this was listening to a presentation just the other day about one of our partners, and she said, for your gutters, you gotta clean them and screen them. I like that little phrase really a bunch. I think it's great. Now we want to use our gutters to be, obviously fire resistant using metal gutters and metal screening, but they can be good. Now you can't just say we screen them and we're good because stuff will collect above that, but it's easy to get out of there by a leaf blower or something. So this is typically, as we mentioned earlier, our highest priority but lowest cost opportunity. We want to work on cleaning up that roof, getting the needles off the roof and the entire roof system, which includes our gutters, getting those cleaned out, getting everything washed off, even the moss and the different things that grow in some of the locations here in Oregon. I want to take my pressure washer up there and get that cleaned off without damaging the shingle, the actual shingle. But cleaning those up and getting the leaf blower up there and all that's a great deal of help to keep those embers from igniting on your roof. And we want to obviously avoid any sort of accumulation of fallen materials that are combustible anywhere near or around the structure. And that's just something we should be doing when we cut our grass, go through with the leaf blower, get things cleaned up so that we're not in panic mode. If something does happen, we know that our place is in pretty good shape. So a couple more slides here, and then we're going to open up a few questions, but let's keep going just for another minute or two while I make a few examples here. So vents are a significant priority, and they're actually getting easier and easier to be a little more fire resistant and resilient against ember intrusion. There are some really great recommendations. Now we do have to have our homes breathe. We don't want to, trap moisture inside. We want to allow them to get out. We do want these things that are, really good construction practices to be implemented in our homes, but we can do a few little things and adjust a little bit. And this example here shows these embers coming in on the different vents, both the gable end vent, and then this is a soffit vent down here. Really important that we look at what type of screening we're installing. And so manufacturers now have tons of options, and even some of them come built into the materials if you buy the right product for reducing down to that 1/8 inch mesh screening. It has to be a non-combustible product, so a nylon screening is not the right thing, but we are finding a lot of metal, aluminum, these kind of products, non-combustible screening opportunities for all these different situations. And you can see the significant difference in the embers coming in on the top right-hand corner where there's 1/4 inch mesh versus the bottom right-hand corner where there's only 1/8 inch mesh. There was a significant reduction in ember intrusion to almost zero actually, but there was always 1 or 2 getting in, but that's okay. Typically our products can handle a few little embers. It's when we start getting a lot of embers and a lot of heat that we cause problems. All right, so we'll talk about a little roof stuff and then we'll pause for some questions on roofing. So if you have some questions, pay attention to what I'm going through here and ask those questions now, that'd be great. So roof coverings are divided into a few different classes. They're rated based on these little lattice structures here in the diagram on the lower left-hand side. There's a class brand, which is a pretty large 12 by 12 lattice. So there's both 2 different ways of materials piled up. There's a pretty easily ignitable pine is usually what's used in these things. You can see the B brand. So this is what they use to put on for a B rating. It can accept this amount of fire. It's a 6 by 6 inch. And then this is about the size of a, larger ice cube, 1.5 by 1.5. And that's a C rating. And then there's unrated, which a lot of products are unrated. But what we want to focus on is some of these higher classes. So if you look over here on the Class A rating, so that's that 12 by 12 brand that was set on the exterior shingles. And you can see that over a lapsed period of time, that's basically no heat is being transferred underneath. They have another picture with a camera underneath and there's nothing to see. So I didn't bother including that. But you can see that same 12 by 12 on a non-Class A rated shingle roof structure down on the bottom. That, excuse me, I'm sorry, I hit the button there. But that particular Ember brand, a Class A, is able to penetrate that roof covering, get into the sheathing, and now we have fire in the structure, and things are going to change real quick with this situation here. So really great demonstration that was put together, and this research is awesome, and it provides some sort of a scale so that we can talk commonalities between these products, and they do the testing. Now, they put some wind on it. You can see in the upper picture how the flames are being pushed. There's kind of a fan that's pushing some wind on there. I don't remember the exact speed of that, but it puts some pressure on it. Now, these aren't going to be exactly how we're going to behave in the wild, in the real situation, but it sure is a really great way to have some, very well documented ratings for these different products, and the manufacturers are able to go through the system, get that sticker, put that rating on there, and then convey that information to you through your supplier or through their products catalogs, etc. So you can understand what your objectives are and what products you want to use and implement those products accurately. So the next slide on roofs here, and then we'll pause for some questions here in just 1 second, is going to be focusing on these Class A roofs. And I want to do that specifically because there are a lot of opportunities for roofs in different ways. And so it's really interesting to see there's both the standalone roof covering, which is just rating on the product that's on the exterior of your roof. And so in this example here on the picture up in the right-hand side, it's a Class A standalone roof. This is a fiberglass composite shingle setup, what they call the 3 tabs in the industry. And so that's a really high quality product with a long warranty. Installed properly is rated Class A. So you can throw that big brand on there and it will go out and there won't be any penetration of anything. So clay tiles, when installed properly, concrete tiles and slate, all these things do have to be installed by manufacturer recommendations. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to hire a roofer, but if you are hiring it out, you need to have somebody who knows how to do this properly, install them to the specs. And if you're doing them, work with your supplier to make sure you're installing these properly so that they are rated as you anticipated by the manufacturer. There's also the assembly rated. So that includes the entire roof system. That's the covering, the underlayment, the materials that make up that entire roof system. So in this example, you can have a Class B or even a C, and most of the recommendations from the professionals are saying we try and avoid the Class C fire rated roof covering altogether in any sort of place that's going to have fire. That doesn't mean you got to go ahead and tear off your roof. It's just a recommendation. But if you are doing a roof, you can put a Class B or even C and have that fire resistant layer right underneath, which is shown in this diagram. And even the roof sheathing products also have opportunities to have be impregnated with some sort of a fire retardant material as well. And that's a really great system right there. And again, it's the whole roof system that we're looking at in these things. So if you're asking about a Class A, but you're okay with an assembly rated, you follow the manufacturer's instructions. Typically, our aluminum or steel metal roofing systems alone aren't necessarily rated at that. But when you combine them with all the other pieces to make that entire system, that assembly rated product, you can bump that stuff up. So it's a assembly rated Class A roof, which is great, pretty resilient to fire, and really great products out there. Now, don't just assume that a product is because you purchased the thing that's on the, that's on the screen right here. We want to check exactly what the specs are from that. One more slide on roofs, and then we'll pause for some questions. So as I mentioned, metal roofs aren't necessarily fire resistant or Class A, but if you put the whole system together. So here's an example of a standard metal roof system you might see in the upper left-hand corner of this diagram here. If you were not to fill that space there with a non-combustible rated product, this would not achieve that Class A rating alone. So you have to include the whole system. So if we skip that, that's a place where embers can get in and cause problems and penetrate through the roof structure. On the right-hand side, you can see what I'm talking about as a whole system. It's all the pieces. We're talking about the soffit, the fascias, the roof sheathing, and the roof, and even some of the rafters have opportunities for fire ratings, even the wall plate, et cetera. Sometimes they're larger timbers, sometimes they can be something impregnated, but the whole structure can be as a system. And so that's what we're really talking about here. We need to think about every piece of it so we can create the best opportunity to avoid any issues. Couple other quick examples I want to demonstrate. This is a standing seam roof here. So they install this and they'll come back and crimp these ribs all together and close up any holes and opportunities. You can see how they flash this up with a fire resilient material and then used actual metal flashing underneath that. And then they're running hardy siding or the concrete fiber siding up against that. And then again, the concrete trim boards on the corners that are all sealed up. Everything will be caulked, sealed up really well, crimped, all that, and they'll have a very good rated roof here. So I thought this was a cool opportunity to take a picture of a home that we found under construction that was implementing these different approaches. On this home here in the center, this is one that this homeowner recently purchased, and they're tearing some things off to replace with more fire resilient materials. And in the dormer here, they actually put a another fiber cement type product, and then are running a board and batten system on it. And so this is a cement product in here, and really increasing that resilience. He'll put his soffits and fascias replaced over here and get everything sealed up real nice. And so they'll really make a big difference on just a standard setup and build. And they'll also fix this gaps in the roof. So that was a really good deal. I wanted to show the example I discussed earlier about that installation is key, and proper installation and then maintaining that installation. This is a fire rated Class A roof, but then the little stopgap measure here fell out. And so it's no longer going to provide that same protection. So really important that we look at how do we keep that stuff maintained and keep an eye on it going into fire season. All right, Aaron, I got some time here. Let's maybe see if we can go through a couple of questions from the Q&A, if you're able to pipe in and help me go through some of these specifically related to roofs.
Yeah, one question is, how do I determine if my shingles or siding is fire resistant?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically these ratings are printed typically on the back side of a product, or within somewhere on the product on the end on a label or something. They're printed with some sort of a marking on a UL rating, and then you can take that code and do a search online. Additionally, all the manufacturers within the last, I don't know, maybe 20 years or so are going to have a rating and a listing on their product. So you could call up and say, I know I have this product. I'm going to get in touch with the supplier, the manufacturer, to help me identify if this is the proper product. So there are opportunities to do that. And there are even other opportunities where you can do an experiment on your own in a controlled environment, maybe in a metal bucket or something, and see what it looks like, just so you understand, but then make sure you know what that actual rating is. But that might be cool if you got a piece of scrap material and you're not sure what it is, throw it in there, put a little fire starter in there, see if it burns, put that out. That could be an example, but I would most want to go with the recommendation from the manufacturer.
Okay, thanks, John. Got some more questions if you have time.
Let's see if we can grab one or two more. Yeah.
Okay, with regards to the fire wrap approach, does the heat of the fire ignite the home contents even if the structure itself may be protected?
The fire wrap approach, I'm not exactly specifically sure what you're talking about there, but yeah, I mean, the idea is to keep any embers coming and keep the heat away there. So the inside, if the embers or there's a heat penetration opportunity or embers or something is able to get within the structure, it could easily ignite the contents inside the home. And so our goal is to keep that stuff away and outside of the house. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, and then another question is with regards to membrane roofs. Recently a homeowner had a fire assessment done. They have a membrane roof, and it noted that they should find out more about its rating and flammability. Would there be a resource people could turn to with regards to membrane roofs and learning more about their ratings and flammability?
Yeah, typically on that system, if it's already installed, I would ask a local expert, find a local roofer who's an expert who might install those type of systems. They often know a really good deal related to those specific materials that are used in your area and would know. Sometimes it's written somewhere, but if it's already all put down and trimmed out and everything, you might not be able to find that. So a big difference would be understanding what those are and if that's unacceptable. So I would look at some of the local roofers in the area who are well recommended and have a good rating system with BBB, et cetera, the county, other places, recommendations from friends, and get those folks out to assess that. And they might go, oh yeah, this is such and such a product and this is what that is, and be able to direct you to that. So, but you could also search online for some of these different things, but typically, or even go to the local home supply store. So, and then I did want to mention one other thing related to metal roofs. So not every metal roof is rated. That's just kind of the way it is. Maybe they use a paint or some other structure, or it's too thin of a gauge or something. And so it isn't inherent that a metal roof is okay all the time. We need to know what that rating is, and those manufacturers will have that. Now, most of them are, but that's not saying that every single metal roof out there, if you find some kind of really low discounted roof and it's not installed properly, it might not be rated highly. So yeah, you got maybe one more real quick, Aaron?
Okay, yeah. Why wouldn't a metal roof, this goes to your last point, I believe, why wouldn't a metal roof provide standalone fire protection? It's inflammable.
Yeah, like I said, it could have a coating on it or something. So, or it could have a ability to penetrate in through that metal roof in those holes that I showed, which are on this diagram right here in front of you. That would mean it could potentially create a place for embers to go. So, yeah. All right, cool. Well, let's keep moving forward, and we can circle back on a few more as we go.
Thank you, John.
All right, thank you very much. Great questions, y'all. And there's a ton of resources out there, and we have some of them linked in our resource guide on this stuff to help y'all understand this. So it's really important to understand where you're at with your system. So great questions. I appreciate that. Type some more in. If I don't get to them, we'll keep trying to circle back. All right, great. No problem. We got everything under control here, so we're in good shape. So decks, we'll move on to decks. Don't forget about the combustible material stored on and underneath your furniture. If you have the opportunity to buy some of that wrought iron furniture instead of the plastic or wood, go for it. Or some of that, metal, non-combustible materials. Gives you something. Now make sure you take those cushions out of there. But then underneath your deck too, let's not store materials that are flammable. Let's make sure we clean those out of the debris and the materials that collect on them during the fall or springtime, and consider them part of your structure, because they are an extension. Typically decks are attached, and they're a really vulnerable place for embers to collect. And you can see in the picture in the bottom corner here, we see all this, leaves and needles have collected in the crack here right up against the home. Well, guess what else is going to collect there in a wildfire situation? Embers. And they'll sit in there and be able to ignite that material and catch on fire. Additionally, I wanted to show this picture because see that deck board has a pretty poor paint covering on it. That's something as well where an ember can get stuck in there and ignite that and then cause some problems. So what I'd recommend in there is get the pressure washer out or the sanding, disc or something, and get that stuff all cleaned off and put a good fresh quality coat. I will talk about this in just a second, why that can be a benefit to have a good fresh coat of stain on there. But these are really vulnerable and will carry right into the structure, typically because, as I mentioned, they are attached and a really vulnerable place for materials to collect. So this is a study that they did in the diagram here showing the different flame spread index related to decks. So they also have an index and a rating, and they've been using the same sort of brands as I discussed earlier. So that 12 by 12 lattice, 6 by 6, and the 1.5 by 1.5 lattice. And so they put these on there and ignite them. And so you can see in the picture on the left, we have two different, structures here. So on the left, there's a class C rated one that's actually, they put the brand on it and it's burned a hole right through the deck and materials collapse underneath. And now you got a lot of flame up against the structure of your home. And on the right, we got a class B where basically that same size Ember here was able to burn out. And so it just burned through that fuel and wasn't able to really damage. I'm not saying it didn't scorch those boards and cause some problems, but we don't see any fire continuing to impact the home, which would then transfer to a larger structure fire. So the Class A's are broken into things like those fiber cement products. You may know them as Hardy, but there are tons of other name brand type products. That would be a 0 rating on the scale of 0 to 200. And several of the PVC composite products also have that Class A rating. Not all of them do, but some of them do. So make sure you know what products you have if you want to understand what that particular rating is. Class B products, there are a lot of them out there, composite products as well, but other examples are there are some wood products. Now these Western larch and redwood are about a 70 on that 0 to 200 scale. Your cedar as well, they're right in that kind of range. So, you get better protection with good quality products. They also recommend, I'll show you here in a second, some of the thicker materials. So, but lastly, I want to talk about the Class C. These are softwood type materials, untreated pine. Even some of the pressure treated pine don't have any sort of fire rating to them, and they go up very rapidly. So you can see the effects of a Class C type product. So consider what your objectives are and potentially spend a little more money. Now, recently, I haven't had an exact square footage quote, but recently we found that some of the composite products are actually very comparable in price to some of the wood product, higher grade wood products. So it's really important to understand what your objectives are, what the product is that's best to meet those objectives. So if you're building a new deck, what do? Consider some of these nearly non-combustible. I never say anything's fireproof because we know that that's a pretty hard thing unless you got a concrete box, and we don't live in a concrete box. So these are ignition resistant construction specs that are divided into the same 3 classes that we've been talking about going along the way. And so there's some great recommendations out there. These are from a FEMA fact sheet that I found. That's really good recommendations. There's a lot of other good things. You'll see some resources on our resources page and links to information that are kind of a little higher level and really detailed. And so take a look at those resources if you're looking at building a new deck or redoing a deck that you have. So some key features I want to point out here are related to the flashings. It's really important that these things are properly flashed. And you can see up here in the upper right-hand corner, these deck flashings are both on the structure, so on your joists and rafters, and then on your connections, it's all flash proper up underneath your exterior cladding, which is also a fire rated fiber cement type product. And these are really great ways. And then behind that, even there's a sheathing that is also a fire rated sheathing. So this is a very good, well constructed. Additionally, you could go up to 3-inch deck boards, as is mentioned in this diagram over here on the left side. Those thicker boards, they act as a really great buffer and aren't as easily ignited as some of the skinnier boards. So in terms of regular wood decking. Metal railings are another really good option. They can be lightweight, easy to install, come in nice finishes that meet whatever your look objectives, aesthetics are for your home, and can be integrated into the building on those. Thick joists with good thick timbers that are joined well, caulked proper, stained adequately, and some of them even are impregnated with fire resilient materials ahead of time in a pressure treating type situation. Not all pressure treated materials are created equal, so a fire rating one might not necessarily be the same as a regular pressure treated timber. And then big, thick 6x6 columns are additional, and then they're capped with a non-combustible material down at the bottom where they join with your ground level. So, but then things can get caught in there. So make sure you go through there with your leaf blower or broom, etc., to clean that stuff out. There's actually been a bunch of information looking at spider webs. I don't know if they actually did research on it, but those can be another place. A lot of spider webs collect in places they can ignite, and then they're light and they move like an ember. So just consider that as well, clean that stuff out. And lastly, I wanted to talk real quickly about a really almost fireproof, basically. This one, again, it's not completely because we never say it is, but you're looking at a paver situation. So this was an older deck. They basically encapsulated the older deck with a fiber cement type product underneath, and then a membranes and fiber-proof fiber cement products on all edges, and then encapsulated that with a concrete paver patio on top. Had the proper flashing and the railings and everything. This is a super high level, very resilient structure diagram right here. So if you're looking at doing something new and different and you really want to keep the deck, go for it. You know, and can be a really great example. If you don't want to have a wood deck anywhere near your place, well, how about considering a non-combustible patio that's made out of pavers or rock? And so we can do a lot of really cool stuff with that. These pavers are great, can provide a really nice hardscape around your home, you know, push that ignitable and combustible material back a little further away, give you a little more buffer, put a nice wall in, get some good landscaping. Up here in the right hand corner is the patio I worked on in Central Oregon a few years ago, where we took all the plants and all out. We put nice gravel in. We had this nice paver patio going around, and so they really created that defensible space and patio up against the structure where he might have had a deck or something in the past. Down in this bottom corner, another just design example. You got a nice fire resilient wall here and nice equipment, different products down here in the bottom, that stepping stones and rock and things with some plants to still soften it up a little. This is an example again in Central Oregon on one we worked on. They have the fiber cement siding, it's board and batten. This is all resilient products. Put in a nice paver patio, big thick beams that are wrapped with a fireproof membrane and have the right sill plates on them and all that. And then a really fire resilient deck structure above that's all sealed up and uses metal and composites that are rated. And this can look awesome. This is a really nice product here. These are super thick pavers, looks great, pretty heavy, but really all turned out really great. And these people had a really fire resilient system. They've been doing their defensible space around that. So think about it as the whole package unit. The last one I wanted to show an example of is just this other paver patio. There's tons of patterns and colors and examples. Again, really fire resilient. They were going to come in and do some fresh siding on this place as well to create a fire resilient siding. So one more, and then we'll take a quick break for some more questions as we're going through here. But let's talk just if you have a deck already, how do you do some retrofitting instead of ripping the whole deck out? Not always necessary. But we can go ahead and go in here and potentially just focus on the area closest to the home. So I showed you that picture earlier where things were accumulating in the crack. And so let's zoom in a little bit on the right-hand side here. You can see that we can pull off the closest deck board and replace that one with, put some flashing down, maybe mold the Z flashing together with the regular metal flashing that is already there for your deck. Put some flashing up the siding so you have an opportunity for a non-combustible space that goes in underneath your regular siding above that. And then you replace that deck board with, Class A rated type deck board on top of that, and that keeps it level and all. And you really have made a huge difference in that specific construction of the deck right there, just by putting a little bit of effort in. Maybe you come through, pressure wash the rest of that deck off, put a fresh coat of stain on that deck as well. So that you have what you need to help protect you from any sort of ember issue. So we mentioned underneath that deck, really important, this picture on the upper left-hand side here, that's a bad deal. Those are catch lots of embers, ignite the whole deck, and up it goes at the bottom side of the hill. So let's clean all that stuff out. This one in the center is a great example of cleaning everything out, putting some nice gravel underneath, getting anything that's combustible out of there, and providing a good space that's protected well from any sort of ember intrusion. And then over here, I just wanted to show another example of some green grass. Well, it's not always green. It turns brown as we go through the summer typically, and is a little more vulnerable to exposure from embers and can ignite and then get up into the underside of the deck. And then you're off to the races with some issues. So not a real hard deal. Get that cut down, weed it out of there, spray it out, whatever, remove that material, put some nice gravel down, and you've really changed the situation there for protecting your deck. And I just wanted to demonstrate here on the right-hand side. This does look like 1/4 inch mesh. I might want to replace it with 1/8, but this is what they had. And so just make sure you go through and do your cleaning up with your leaf blower or your rake or whatever every time you're cutting your grass or doing some maintenance outside when it's wildfire season. So you're prepared, and embers can't get in there. They have nothing to ignite. They can land on that rock and out they go. And you've provided a much more protected space. Okay, so the last piece on decking here, and then we'll open it up for some questions. I get a lot of questions related to stains or coatings. And so here's an example of a study that was done where they put an oil-based stain on quality decking products. So they took a deck, pressure washed it off, cleaned it all up nice. It was no rotten boards. They were all solid in structure. And then they put an oil-based stain on them. And on the other side was, they just cleaned it up. It's a weathered deck, no stain on it. Then they put the embers up against that, like we talked about earlier, those lattice worked embers. They put those on the deck and watch what happened. Well, what they found in this particular study, and it's been actually replicated in some different atmospheres, in different projects, showed that freshly stained deck did not contribute. Now, it's not saying that that's the case everywhere, but it didn't add to increasing the fire hazard. So what that tells us is make sure you have a good quality stain or paint product that's in good shape on good solid boards. One of those examples you see down here in the right-hand corner is this might be an area on a deck that precipitation was accumulating on the deck and running off and, affecting the structure and quality of those deck boards right there. And that's just that fascia board there, but it still is a place for embers to get in. Those embers go up against that rotten piece of wood, get lodged in there, and it's easy to ignite that wood. So we know that old wood, decayed wood, is really easy and it's compromised, so it's easy to ignite. So, make sure those boards are sound, pull them off, replace them if you need to, put good paint, good caulk, all that stuff. A lot of people also ask about fire retardant coatings. There have been some of these different products out there, and actually one of the researchers, after doing a bunch of work on this stuff, said some of the stuff can be interpreted as snake oil, so we want to make sure we're really careful on that stuff. So the big problem is when they put that coating down there, it might have a good protection on the siding or on the decking, but over time, that weathering of that product really degrades the ability of it to withstand ember intrusion or fire. So it's a very short window where that stuff is protecting. And so the recommendation from the professionals is to not use fire retardant coatings and instead use some of these other things we've been talking about. So hopefully that helps to demystify a little bit of this stuff related to your deck. And so, Aaron, I wanted to see if there's some opportunities to answer a few questions related to the decks.
So we have one question. I have a fairly new concrete patio replacing an old wooden deck. What about where the patio meets the wall of the house? On a wood deck, you noted the flashing.
Yeah, great question. And so where that patio comes up to the house, you can put in a fire resistant flashing, or you can even put some siding, like some sort of a fiber cement type siding that would help to basically detach where any embers would collect up against that from igniting the side of the home, and then go through there, like we mentioned, and bring your air compressor, your leaf blower or whatever, and clean that ignitable and combustible material out of there frequently during wildfire season. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Okay, and then some financial questions. One, with hardscape work such as stonework and pavers, have you had to deal with impervious surface tax issues?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I have not seen that, but they're not impervious technically. They do breathe. And so unless you're putting some sort of a water type membrane and then sheeting that off, what you would do on a typical paver patio is dig down, put road base of 4 inches or whatever the manufacturer recommends, sand on top, and then your pavers, which are porous and have cracks in them. And so that water should filter through. And what we would do in the industry would be to make sure there's a slight grade away from the home on that. That water will go and seep through all the layers and then be able to filter out. Now, if you're working on an impervious membrane type structure, that might be a little different. And there would probably be some sort of a square footage rule. And so you just want to understand what your building codes are in your local community, whether it's the county or the city. Make sure you get a permit for these things if you're doing them, if they need to have one, and make sure you've followed all the regulations that they're requesting of you. So you should be in a pretty good place there.
Okay, thanks, John. Next question is, are insurance companies giving discounts with house insurance for fire resistant upgrades?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can give my favorite extension answer, which is depends. In certain circumstances, they may be doing that. In other circumstances, they may not be doing that. Now, we think it's a valuable thing to do this for your own deal. And if you're in a wildfire area, maybe there's some information that might come out as we continue to develop some of the legislation around all this stuff here in Oregon. But at the interim time, there really isn't much related to that I know of, but that can be changing. And so it's a great thing to ask your insurance agent if that's something that can be offered, and work with them to understand what those products need to be and how they need to be installed, and providing certifications or other paperwork to get that done. So yeah, it depends. Give a call to the right people and see if that can help you. Probably should keep moving here. I got a few more slides to go through. So
thanks.
All right. Thanks y'all very much. Great questions. And again, all this stuff is going to be on our website, all the links, all the pictures, the presentation recording. So let's talk a little bit about fencing, and we'll kind of try and wrap it up here in the not too distant future with the last few things. So fencing is another pretty vulnerable place. Make sure that area at the bottom of the fence is clear of burnable, combustible debris. Avoid placement of that mulch or other combustion, easily combustible products right up against your home. And so this picture on the right-hand side up here shows where they went a regular fence and then down to a more fire resilient fence. So they used some metal on that area right up against the house for the last 10 feet or something like that, so that 0 to 5 is covered, and then a little bit beyond that. And so that's a really great opportunity to reduce any sort of pressure up against your structure from your fencing. So we want to keep our dogs or our children in our yard, and so we can still keep that fence, but then we provide this upgrade, if you will, for resilience to wildfire embers. And so definitely on the last 5 feet, and if you have an opportunity to go a little bit more like they do on this photo here, that'd be great. There are a lot of products. I just use one example. We don't recommend one product over another, but there are a lot of really good fire rating fencing products out there. So you could do the same kind of thing where you use the same product over the entire fenced area, if that's what you want to do. And these products from a manufacturer like Trex or others out there are using these composite products that have fire ratings. And there might be a little more, they might not be. Just do your homework and get the quotes on the materials. But these can be a really good alternative, and they have pretty good fire resilience on a lot of these products. So there's a lot more of this stuff coming on the market all the time, and they're getting much more affordable as we continue to develop them. So a lot of good opportunities. And so really want to point out that structure connection piece is super important for you to have that fire resilient material installed. I want to talk a little bit about siding as well, because that's another really vulnerable place and very important. I'm not saying you need to go and rip all your siding off unless you have the vinyl siding that's here on the right-hand picture. This was just exposed to heat, and you can see in the background there's a few trees that were torched and some other landscape materials. This basically exterior material just melted and was unable to withstand the heat from the fire. Not a good product, and then those embers can get in those cracks and such, so not ideal. But then we can also do some really great stuff with what we have. And so you can see down here in the bottom, we have a homeowner who is going through and putting some good fresh chinking. I like this example because it's really bright. Now they're going to restain everything and kind of hide that brightness. And there's lots of different colors. You don't have to use this particular color. This is just what this homeowner wanted to do because they had a game plan. But basically they're going in and making sure embers can't sit anywhere in those places, and those joints are properly caulked. And then they're replacing any of the decayed timbers and then putting a good seal on the outside. So they're really working on maintaining that log home chinking. That stuff doesn't last forever. Not only does it help with your energy savings, but it also helps with any sort of ember intrusion. I also wanted to touch on another one of these little examples with the ember that they did. So on the left-hand side photograph here, the far left panel is a wood composite standard siding, non-rated. The back one is a fiber cement sided rated product, and they put the ember down in the corner of this thing. You can see the ember is mainly burned out and started to move away, and the wood composite siding is compromised significantly by the flames versus the fiber cement, which, don't get me wrong, it's got a little bit of scorch and it's even getting burned real hot and a lot of pressure on it, but it hasn't caused any sort of intrusion of fire behind that. So big difference in these two materials, and their ratings might be a difference in cost, but it really depends on what your objectives are here. And if you have an opportunity and you're looking to do some fresh siding, the fiber cement installed properly using the right manufacturer recommendations can really be a big difference. You can install these products, make sure you read the instructions or deal with your provider to understand what that needs to be, or a professional who knows how to do this can also do this product installation. I get a lot of questions related to sprinkler systems, so I want to touch on that briefly. There are some pros. They can be effective in preventing damage from a wildfire, and they can also help extinguish flames both inside and outside. Now, in certain jurisdictions, sprinklers are required inside the home, and they can be tied to a system that goes outside the home. There are also some cons with this and some things to be aware of. Firebrands can penetrate places into the interior where the exterior doesn't even burn to set them off if you have just an exterior system and they haven't picked up that heat or haven't been able to turn on. Sometimes winterization is needed to make sure that they're safe and the pipes don't burst and different things like that. So a little bit extra maintenance. If it's a really windy event and those sprinklers are shooting out on a certain place and the wind's pushing them and they're not able to wet the area where the embers are hitting, then we have an issue there. You got to think about what your water supply is like. What happens if the power goes out? What happens if you don't have enough water? What happens if the sprinkler system trigger doesn't activate? What happens if the sprinkler is burned? Now, you don't want to put regular lawn sprinklers on your roof and think that those are going to get the job done. These are, very well manufactured and specifically built for these applications. They cost a little bit more money. If you're going to do it, get it done properly by a professional design, engineer it right, put it installed properly. Don't cut corners if you're going to rely on this. So what the recommendation is here for sprinklers is they're more of a supplement to than a replacement of these mitigation strategies, which is the home hardening that we've already discussed. So really important. Just want to emphasize that this isn't something we should just rely on and think that it's going to solve all our problems. Okay, so wrapping it up, we're going to just last little bit and then we'll take some time for questions. But well, now what? Improve your chances by taking some action. There were a lot of things pointed out in the webinar, and this is just the tip of the iceberg for all the different opportunities. So if you're just starting, do one thing, whether it's an evaluation, filling out a checklist, doing something, cleaning something up, replacing a screen, fixing a board, something of that nature. Get started doing something. If you're further along and have already done some of these things, review the checklist, go back through, do a little more in-depth check on things. Really think about what am I doing over the next several years and how am I getting better with how my home is hardened against vulnerable spots. And then make sure you're taking a look at some of those checklists and things that we have on our resources page so that you can do one more thing every year, every month, or whatever works for your schedule to help create a more hardened home. And that's it. So it looks like we just have a couple quick minutes. Maybe we could take a few more questions to wrap up, and then we can join us. We'll be back in 2 weeks for December 1st. We're going to have a panel discussion related on from the home to the landscape, something we did in the spring, and we're going to follow up on with some specific examples. So yeah, Aaron, do we have a last question or two maybe?
Yeah, thank you, John. I have a question. We have a person who's attending who is a little bit worried about affordability. And so in terms of the high cost of replacing plywood siding, is there any sort of fiber cement covering that I can do to make my siding more fire resistant, keeping in mind cost limitations?
Yeah, there are a ton of great products out there. Actually, if you've seen the price of some of the wood products right now, there are some really good opportunities, cost savings to be done if you're trying to replace things. If it's a really limiting thing, there are some different places you can go. Provide some assistance for some of these products potentially. Additionally, let's say you can't replace that. You can't afford to do that. We'll go ahead and make sure it has a good fresh coat of paint or stain on it that's sealed up well, caulk all your joints, do the most you can within the limitations or the restrictions or requirements you have to be sure to address all the different things, how embers are going to collect, where they're going to go, what they can do, replace those rotten boards, do things like that that won't be so costly. I know painting can be very expensive, but you can paint. It can take you some time. I spent over a month painting my exterior of my house last year. Saved me a lot of money, cost me a lot of time, but we did it right and we made sure things were sealed up well. We had a good protective coating. We don't want to have flaking paint or rotten wood, things like that. So do the best you can with whatever you have.
Okay, and we currently have no questions in the chat. Excuse me.
Great.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate you taking the time to answer all these questions and give us a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the good questions. I appreciate that. I like to have a little more interaction. So thanks for asking your questions. I hope we were able to answer some of those. Remember the principles that we talked about. Not everything needs to be done specifically a certain way all the time, but think about the principles and then work with your local suppliers or other folks that you have contact with. Do what you can. We appreciate you all listening. Come back in 2 weeks for our next Wildfire Wednesday on December 1st, where we're going to talk about from the home to the landscape. And let us know if you have questions. In the meantime, take a look at our webpage for resources and references that we referred to in this particular presentation. And we look forward to seeing you next time.